We are ready to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Sharad Sharma. Sharad's mantra is to lead big and small companies through orbit change. He has 3 decades of experience in the internet, enterprise software, and digital infrastructure markets, and is a prominent voice in India's technology ecosystem. Sharad is a passionate evangelist of the software product ecosystem in India. He co-founded iSpurt Foundation, a non-profit technology think tank devoted to making India a product nation. Amongst the various positions held by Sharad, he has chaired NASSCOM Product Forum in its formative years and was a member of the NASSCOM Executive Council from 2009 to 13. Sharad is a member of the National Startup Advisory Council and SEBI's Financial and Regulatory Technology Committee. He has also served on RBI's UK Sinha MSME Committee and National Digital Payments Committee. Thank you, sir, for agreeing to be a part of this event today. We now request you to share your views on the account aggregator. Thank you.
So there are 3 things that I'm hoping to talk about. Let me first take you back 10 years. This moment is special because today as we are assembled here, it's kind of clear that account aggregator would be successful. I think we can probably agree on that. But if I take you 10 years back, there was the same moment about Aadhaar. Aadhaar had not yet hit 300 million enrollments. But it was clear there's something going on and it'll take off. It had just managed to defeat a serious challenger from the government. It's called the Population Register, which was being championed. Some of you know the story. I won't go into the details here. So, at that time, a simple idea took root, which has animated many of us here. Vamsi has been part of that journey in a very big way. And that idea is, can we reimagine the flow of people, money, and information through our society? The flow of people, of course, is founded on identity, but it also requires eKYC, e-sign, and all those things to be in place. Flow of money, we associate it with UPI, but it's also the Aadhaar-enabled payment system. And flow of information is, of course, account aggregator, and the underlying protocol that powers it, which is the DEPA, Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. Of course, the fact that this is happening in financial space is an artifact of the fact that you needed a legal kind of a coverage for this to happen. And I think, we are all very grateful for FSDC to have provided that. And that was a leap of faith. FSDC had not done anything like this before. And now, of course, with the new bill coming, and some of you will have an opinion on the bill, but if you look at it through the eyes of DEPA or the account aggregator, it is a good bill because it almost requires the system to be deployed on a universal basis in other sectors. And so we've come a long way. Why is this important? Why was this simple idea, reimagine the flow of people, money, and information, an important idea? Because it has, as was expected, given us 3 benefits. I would say 2.5, because the last half is yet to be proven. The first benefit was inclusion. And, we were able to do inclusion with bank accounts largely because of eKYC. Now, that's another matter. eKYC cost 2 rupees then, and by the time Jio used eKYC, it was 5 rupees, and some of our startups here may have to pay 25 rupees, and I can't understand the reason for this. But nevertheless, that was responsible for inclusion. It has also led to reimagining of government services. And of course, DBT is clearly an example. But we don't appreciate what happened during COVID and COVID. And I remember this meeting when people are sitting across the table. It is clear we'll have to vaccinate 1 billion people. And this discussion that is happening is how many vaccination centers will we need? And just so that for vaccinating 25 million babies a year, which is roughly, the number of babies that we have 30 to 40,000 vaccination centers, depending on the time of the year. So let's assume there are 40,000 vaccination centers, and I'm not exaggerating. At that time on the table, the discussion is, of course, we'll need 10 times more, we'll need 20 times more, we'll need 50 times more, right? I mean, because we don't have to do 25 million people, we got to do 1 billion people. But the idea that won was that we will not add more vaccination centers. And instead, reimagine the flow of the whole program by using the modern infrastructure that had been built. So all of you got your vaccination by Aadhaar, right? Flow of people through Aadhaar. You got your vaccination certificate through DigiLocker, the predecessor of data sharing. And many of those 40,000 vaccination centers were private centers. All of them were paid more or less on time before they opened the next day. In fact, there was no real issue that bubbled up to a single press article which said that my vaccination center was not paid in time, right? And so what did it do? It unlocked, you could say, 52x productivity by just reimagining the flow of people, money, and information. And I would like to suggest to you that this is going to happen on an economy-wide basis, because this is not merely applicable to government organizations or government programs. This is also applicable to our private institutions. And therefore, we must think deeply about how to reimagine the flow, for chronic care and with some doctors, right? So we'll see a year or two from now how this works. And so this is the first thing that I wanted to leave behind with you, is that a simple idea is what has brought us here. And this is an important moment, because that simple idea is finally coming to fruition, where all the three things are in place. And we have to see whether the three benefits that it should deliver will be in place or not. And a year or two from now, we will know whether that is the case. The second thing I want to talk to you about is a little bit about the thinking behind data sharing, right? Because there's some interesting concepts behind it. And of course, the first concept is that we should have federated data stores. We shouldn't create centralized data stores. And if we create centralized data stores, then for a big country like India, the risks, cybersecurity risks are a lot higher. So the fundamental premise in DEPA is that let the gold copy stay wherever it is, right? And so let the bank own the gold copy. It's only a silver copy that is moved, and that silver copy is moved or mediated by electronic consent, and the system is double-blind in nature. And Vamsi, I'm hoping you'll explain all this in your panel. And so these are some kind of design principles that have animated the design of DEPA. Why do I bring this up? Is because these are pretty unique. The fact is that way back in time, we had an option. We had an option to think about consent for collection, which is the US model. The US model is that you have consent for collection. So, supposing I have a new application and that says, hey, Sharad, I want to know everything about your life because I can make better recommendations to you on your phone, and they want to collect all this data. They'll collect it by having terms of service, and based on that, they'll collect all this information. And then what happens after that is no man's land, right? I mean, it's free for all. There's no consent for sharing in the US formulation of data sharing. And so we asked ourselves a question, and we said, if we had between consent for collection, consent for sharing, only one thing that we could have, ideally you should have both, but if you could have only one, which one would that be? And we concluded that consent for sharing is more important, because even if that entity collected all my data to offer me a service, as long as they could not share this with somebody else without my permission, I would still be reasonably protected, right? And that notion is now animating the world. So why I want to tell you that this will travel to other parts of the world. And I'm hoping that some of the TSPs here will travel with it. So this is, in our minds, the analogy is that when Scandinavia saw GSM, in mid-90s, it was clear everybody in the world needs a mobile phone. Now it's clear to everybody that they need an electronic system for data sharing. And the best game in town is the Indian model right now. And if this India model travels, you should see Nokias and Ericssons emerge from that, right? So that's the longer term thought process that is associated with it. Before I move away from data, I wanted to mention a little bit of what is coming, right? So today, essentially what Account Aggregator is doing is taking the gold copy from the FIP and giving a silver copy to the FIU. and that is with a purpose limitation. And why is it called a silver copy? Because you can only use it for the purpose that you received it for, right? You can't share it further. And but over time, you will have an aggregated set of silver copies. And if you have an aggregated set of silver copies, the question is, can you do more magic with it, especially for training your models, right? And so today the way to do that is to then anonymize this aggregated data set and then give it to somebody else. The problem with that approach of anonymization is that it's an art form. If you over-anonymize, then the utility of the data is lost. And if you under-anonymize, then de-identification is possible, and I don't need to go into details because it has happened many times before. So when we looked at this, we concluded this is not scalable. This cannot be scaled in the Indian context, and we had to reimagine the way we would do this. And so what is coming in the next 3-4 months is another approach. And the other approach says, instead of this data going from the FIU to anybody else in an anonymized form, the model comes and visits the FIU. In fact, this FIU for this purpose will be called the training. And so the model comes in, the model is certified. And what does that mean? That there will be a publicly open source system based on differential privacy available to you for certification, which will give you a privacy budget on the model, which essentially in layman's language will say that this model can inspect the data, it can train itself on that data, and it is only taking the model parameters out, it cannot take any personal information out. And since this is computationally guaranteed, right, it reduces the liability of the people who are offering this data to the modeler, because you have computational guarantees that your privacy of that data set is protected. Now, this is particularly important for us in health, and therefore the first place where we are applying this is in a national biobank project, because our hope is that in the health space where there's health stack and some of it is already out there, the plumbing is out there, but in the future we believe that the most valuable part of health is going to be actually the models that assist the doctor, right? Because for diagnosis, and that's going to be biomarker based. And it'll be also synthetic biology, because the new types of drug treatments, cell therapy and others, are all a result of computational biology, of synthetic biology. And so we don't want to become a nation where we are dependent on other people's models to make it happen. So our vision is that India becomes the model maker of the world, at least in health and hopefully also in the underwriting and the financial space. So Deepak Shenoy's algorithms and models, may drive not just what happens here in India, but maybe what happens elsewhere in the world. But for that, we need this new infrastructure. And this new infrastructure has to become available. This is going to be part of DEPA itself. So what you have seen, the way to think of this is, what you have seen is the inference cycle. Inference cycle is that the individual can ask the FIP to send the data to the FIU, so that FIU can infer, whether or not to give a loan, what to do with it. But that's only one cycle. The second cycle is called the training cycle. So only half the story has been told, the other half is coming next year. So I think the fact that you're betting on this is very, very important. And I think we'll have huge payoffs in the future. So the last part that I want to talk to you about is, I want to step back again a little bit. In that first idea, which is the idea behind India Stack, can you reimagine the flow of people, money and information? And the second idea, which is what I described to you about DEPA, what underpins both of these ideas? And why I want to share that with you is because that will help you participate in this much better. There's a very simple thing that underpins it. The thing that underpins it is that if you got to find solutions to Indian problems, just innovation on public policy is not enough. You need public policy and public technology. There are two hands that are sitting on the potter's wheel. So if you imagine a potter's wheel, can you make something on the potter's wheel with one hand? Not possible. You need both hands, right? And so the idea here in India is that we need both hands. We need public technology and public policy. When both come together, then you have an environment in which private innovation can thrive. And private innovation in India is super important. We are a big country. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So if you can build the public policy and public technology to really unlock hundreds of experiments, then only can you solve any problem, whether it's lending or even health or anything that you're talking about will need hundreds of experiments to happen on top of it. So this is the simple idea that is there. So the question is it an idea unique to India? No, it is not. It's an idea that comes from a wonderful paper written in July of 1945. It's called Science, the Endless Frontier by a guy called Vannevar Bush. He was the Dean of Engineering of MIT. And it became, the US government at that time adopted the recommendations of that paper in July of 1946. And with much fanfare, like we had the 75th celebration, they had the 75th celebration of this in the US in 2021. Because if you think of the US economy, what that paper said is, let's build an economy based on science and technology. And so when you think of the US, you must realize that is how the US is. You have GPS and therefore you have Uber. If there was no GPS, there would have been no Uber. You have mRNA vaccine, but mRNA vaccine, out of the 20 years of development, 16 years was exclusively funded by the US government. It's only in the last 4 or 5 years, there was co-funding by the private sector. But 100% of the profits go to the private sector. That is what Vannevar Bush put in place. So he put in place this simple idea that public goods, private innovation is the way to solve problems. Now in India, we don't have the money or the institutional structure to get that the public goods to happen in an institutional framework, right? So what's the answer to that? To do it before 1945, how do you think it used to happen? It used to happen through Edison. What was Edison? Edison was a citizen technologist. When we have pasteurized milk, what was Louis Pasteur doing? He was a citizen scientist. Even astronomy was citizen astronomy at that time. So there's a long history all the way till 1945 of all science and technology being citizen science and technology, right? So in India, rather than waiting for the institutional structure to take place, why not draw into the, of the goodwill and the capability of our citizens to build this public technology that we are talking about? So everything that is happening is really citizen, in some sense, citizen technologies building this public infrastructure, essentially gifting it to the government so that they can combine it with public policy and together we can make some magic happen. Now this means a new class of institutions are coming up. Now many of you may not know MOSIP. How many of you know MOSIP? I see only one hand. So many of you voted with your EVM machines. EVM is a damn good system. You can see the US needs it, right? But it hasn't traveled anywhere else. Why doesn't it travel? Because EVMs are owned by Government of India. And another state says, hey, I don't trust you. If I'm in the good books, everything will work fine. When I'm not in the good books, you'll have a backdoor and you'll weaponize the system and you'll shape my elections. This is the same reason we are telling our startups, saying, please don't build it on GPS, build it on Navic. Because, today good times, but we are not in the good books of US. US will scramble GPS and you and the country will be left in a lurch, so better be safe and build it on Navic. So while in India, public tech travels well when in government hands, public tech does not travel well outside India when it's in government hands. So if we wanted to take our Aadhaar or identity system elsewhere, what needed to be done? We had to find a new institution to own it and drive it. That institution is IIIT Bangalore here. And that MOSIP is the effort inside that. It has already been adopted by 9 countries, amounting to 350 million people, of which if you go to mosip.io, you will see 74.5 million people are using it as of today. We'll hit 75 million. Why have we not spoken about it? Because we said till we get to 100 million, it's a rounding error. So we are waiting for that. So I'm hoping there are not many press people here. But so you understand what I'm talking about. So there is, for it to travel in other parts of the world, you need to build new institutions, and MOSIP is an example of that. The other institution that I want to call out is Sahamati. It's again a unique type of an institution, and there'll be many more as we go forward. And I want to give you a little bit of a background as to why it is so important and why it exists. So for that, I have to tell you a story. Do I have time? How am I doing on time? Okay. So may I take a few more minutes? Last December, there's a famous evolutionary biologist that passed away. His name is E.O. Wilson. You may not know him, but you may know him by his quote. He became famous in the last, first of all, a very famous evolutionary biologist, won every possible award, one of the stalwarts of that field. But in the last 15 years, he got worried about CRISPR. And then he came up with this quote. He said, we have a Paleolithic brain, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Has anybody heard this quote, right? So this came from him. And he said that changes the game completely. Why does it change the game completely? Because he says when in the past you had, let's say, nuclear technology, you could expect the society to damp down the bad use cases, amplify the good use cases, and everything would work fine. But what is society? Society is individuals and institutions. Today, individuals and institutions are hackable because this godlike technology can hack them, right? And this is going to happen in AI because our social media can hack them, and they want to hack them, right? And so he said, this in his view, this is now this is a threat to humanity, right? So he said we have to therefore pivot. We have to create a new way of doing things. And the pivot is that technology itself has to become values-based technology. Earlier, the whole premise was that the technology should be values-free technology. Technologists were given a free hand, and they were supposed to build as permissive or as flexible a technology as possible, nuclear technology or anything else, without regard to what the social consequences of that. Some people believe COVID is a result of that thinking, and the job of society was to deal with that. He said that's not going to be possible in the future. You need a new breed of technologists who assume the responsibility of building flexible technology where needed and restrictive technology where needed. But how does a poor technologist know where to be flexible and where to be restrictive? So they have to take the cues from the normative values. In other words, we have to say what the norms we want. And therefore, if these are the norms we want, then my public technology at least should support these norms, right? So this is the thinking. So this has created a furore in the technology space because majority of the technologists are still in the camp of, let me be free. Don't interfere with I want to build values-free, most flexible technology that is possible. India is emerging as a hub for public technologists who believe in values-free technology. And we are starting to put these values out in a much more formal way. We should have done it for data. We were not smart enough to do it then. We'll come back and do it a little later. But we have certainly done that with health. Recently, we published a peer-reviewed paper to have this discussion on a global basis. And so it's with ISC, Art Park, and iSpirit. You can find it. Vijay Chandru, some of you may know him, Raghu Dharmaraju, and myself. We put this out, and it's leading to a global debate whether these 10 normative principles on health are right or wrong. And that's very helpful. Why do I bring this up? Because if these normative principles have to come to life, then it's not merely the technologists who have to now do their part. It's a new responsibility. It's not merely the regulators that have to do their part. It is an old responsibility. Regulators always have a sense of what should be the normative outcomes they're looking for, right? Right? So that's not new. It's always been there. But there is a third responsibility. Third responsibility is that the market players also have to do their part. If the market players have to do their part, means they have to be enlightened citizens. They have to weed out bad apples amongst themselves. They have to hold themselves to a higher standard against those normative principles, which means they must self-regulate. Sahamati is designed to be India's, hopefully, most modern self-regulating organ. It's not the first. You, in your world, have AMFI, for example. But this is a new generation of self-regulating organizations that are coming, where the idea is that the members of this grouping, this market collective, will hold them to a high standard. Because data is so important. It's the fourth factor of production. It can be misused in ways. It has the potential to reorder humanity as we know it. The Western world is worried about democracies at threat, right? Because of the way news and opinion is handled. This is a very important subject. So now you can see the institutional structure that is emerging for this. The institutional structure is that you need a new generation of tech organizations, public tech organizations. In our case, they're volunteer-based. This is not a surprise. A lot of our tech is built on a volunteer basis. Second is you need regulators who know how to collaborate with public tech and public policy to make magic happen. And you need a new generation of market players who are extremely innovative, but also want to be good citizens of the society that they operate in. That is the vision that India is starting to implement. And it is in your hands. It is our collective vision. We only can bring this to life. And I think we will, with everybody's participation. And I'm very grateful to you, Anuj, and CAMS to kind of bring this out. And because if we can do this, we have a head start. There is no other country in the world that has reimagined the flow of all the three things today, right? I love taking pot shots at Estonia because they try and say, no, no, we are it. Even Estonia is not there. And so there's no other country in the world that has reimagined the flow of people, where they've gone from physical identity to fully authenticable digital identity. They've done with what we have managed to do with UPI as a country and what we are now doing with data. And so, and if we can combine this with this institutional structure that we talked about, this is our window to be having a new innings as India. So it is in your hands. I implore you to embrace this with both your hands and help it become a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very inspiring speech.